Chapter 1. A Symphony of Silence. The silence in the Alpha King's office was a living thing. It had a weight, a texture. It tasted of old stone and polished wood and the cold, lonely power of the man who sat behind the massive oak desk. Alara Vane had learned to breathe it, to move through it without making a ripple. For 3 years she had been a ghost in the heart of the kingdom, the invisible secretary to the most powerful and most broken man alive. Her movements were a symphony of silence. The soft shush of a document placed just so, the quiet click of her pen, the way she anticipated his need for a fresh glass of water before he even knew he was thirsty. Competence was her shield. Invisibility was her armor. Because to be seen by King Kalen Darius Blackthorn was to be judged, and to be judged by him was to be found wanting. This morning, a trade document from the Southern Pax had arrived with a critical error in the shipping dates. A lesser secretary would have panicked, interrupted him. But Alara simply fixed it. She cross-referenced the lunar calendar with the Pax harvest cycles, made the correction with a pen stroke as fine as a spider's thread, and prepared the corrected copy. All without a word. Her real life was a secret, tucked away in a small metal box under a loose floorboard in her tiny room. After her duties, she pulled it out. The scent of old tin and dreams filled her small space. Inside, neatly bundled stacks of bills waited. Her escape fund. Every week, another bill joined the pile. One day, it would be enough. Enough to leave this world of silent, suffocating power. Enough to find a place where a half-blood nobody could just be. She added today's earnings, her heart giving a hopeful little flutter. Soon. As a result of this meticulous planning, she had a goal that kept her sane. It was her own little rebellion, her secret little life, a life where she wasn't just the king's shadow. When she returned to the office, he was staring out the window, a statue of grief carved from granite. His shoulders were broad enough to carry the weight of the entire kingdom, yet they sagged with a sorrow that was 5 years old and forever fresh. Luna Lyra, his first mate, his assassinated queen. The castle still whispered her name. "The Southern Trade Accord is ready for your seal," Alara said, her voice a quiet murmur, careful not to break the silence too harshly. He didn't turn. He just extended a hand back, his fingers long and scarred. A king's hand, a warrior's hand. She stepped forward, holding the heavy parchment. Her goal was simple: place it in his hand, retrieve the royal seal, and retreat back into the shadows. Simple, easy, safe. Her heart beat a steady, controlled rhythm. Just do the job. Just be invisible. She placed the scroll in his waiting palm, and then his hand trembled. A single violent tremor. It was so small, so quick. If she hadn't been watching, she would have missed it. But she saw it. A crack in the granite. A flicker of chaos in the crushing control. He snatched the scroll and dismissed her with a sharp guttural, "Leave." Alara retreated, her own hands perfectly steady. But as the heavy oak door clicked shut behind her, a question took root in her mind, a tiny, dangerous seed. What could possibly make the unbreakable Alpha King shake? The seed was a hook, pulling her deeper into a mystery she shouldn't want to solve, because curiosity was a luxury ghosts could not afford. That tremor was the first loose thread in a tapestry she was about to unravel. This single, unsettling moment hinted that the king's infamous control was not as absolute as it seemed, setting the stage for the chaos to come. Chapter 2. Echoes in the Archives. Following the unsettling incident in the king's office, Alara sought refuge in the one place where the silence felt comforting rather than threatening: the royal archives. Here, the air was thick with the sweet, dusty perfume of history. It smelled of brittle paper and dried ink and forgotten stories. It was a library of ghosts, and among them, she felt a little less alone. She wasn't just hiding. She was hunting. Hunting for a ghost of her own. Her mother, Her fingers, usually so steady, trembled just a little as she traced the faded spines of ancient pack ledgers. She was looking for her mother's family name, Vane. An omega line so weak, so insignificant, it was barely a footnote in the grand, violent history of the werewolf packs. Her goal was to find something, anything, a reason, a connection, a scrap of identity to cling to in a world that told her she had none. Most records were a dead end. Births, deaths, mating ceremonies, all for a family that seemed to dwindle with each passing generation. It was a story of fading away, of becoming invisible just like she had. A familiar, aching sadness settled in her chest. Was this her destiny too? To just fade? Because she felt this deep-seated need for belonging, she pushed past the disappointment. She dug deeper. She pulled out older, more forbidden texts, the ones that spoke of the Great Purge, a dark time centuries ago when certain bloodlines were deemed a threat and erased from history. And there it was. A single, chilling entry, the ink faded almost to nothing. And the last of the lichen line, with their cursed ability to soothe the feral soul, were hunted to extinction. Their names are stricken. Next to the entry, in a different, spidery script, was a list of purged family names. Her breath caught in her throat. There, at the bottom of the list, was a name so similar to her own it couldn't be a coincidence. Vane, lichen, feral soul. The words meant nothing to her, yet they resonated deep in her bones, like a half-remembered song. Was this a clue? Or just another false hope? It was an open loop, a question she had no way of answering, pulling her further into a past that was deliberately buried. What if her family wasn't weak? What if they were erased? A sound shattered the dusty silence. It wasn't a human sound. It was a howl. A long, mournful, agonizing howl that echoed from the king's tower, traveling through the very stones of the castle. It wasn't a cry of power or dominance. No. This was a howl of pure, undiluted pain. It spoke of a hollowed-out soul and a beast tearing against its own skin. It was the sound of a man, of a wolf, completely and utterly alone. Alara froze, the heavy book clutched to her chest. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden, terrible silence that followed. Everyone in the castle knew the king grieved. But this was something more. This was the sound of a soul splintering apart. It was raw and terrifying. This was the why behind the tremor in his hand. It was the sound of the feral soul she had just read about. She had come to the archives seeking her own story, but she had stumbled upon the dark, secret song of his. The howl was a hook, a terrifying piece of a puzzle that was now missing two pieces instead of one. Her past was a mystery. His present was a torment. And a terrifying premonition whispered through her that the two were somehow connected, a realization that sent a shiver of fear and destiny down her spine. Chapter 3. The Unseen Spark. The day proceeded as if that soul-shattering howl had never happened. The castle staff moved with their usual practiced efficiency, their faces smooth, unreadable masks. Denying the king's pain was part of their job description. For Alara, the sound was a phantom echo in her ears, a constant low hum beneath the surface of the day. It was also her 25th birthday, a milestone she had planned to let pass in its usual quiet, unnoticed way. Fate, it seemed, had other plans. The afternoon sun slanted through the tall, arched windows of the king's office, dust motes dancing in the golden light. Kalen was in a foul mood, his energy a crackling, dangerous storm contained within the room. He had barely spoken, communicating only in sharp gestures and guttural monosyllables. Ilara's every nerve was on high alert. Her goal today was the same as every day: survive. Survive his moods. Survive the suffocating tension. Survive until she could retreat to her room and her escape fund. The revised treaty for the Silver Moon Pack, he grunted, not looking up from his work. Bring it. She retrieved it from her desk, the heavy parchment cool and smooth beneath her fingertips. Her heart did its usual little nervous tap dance as she approached him. He was a predator, even sitting down. The sheer force of his presence was a physical weight, pressing down on her. She focused on the task. Simple, easy, safe. Don't be seen. Don't be noticed. Don't exist. She held the scroll out to him. He reached for it, his eyes still on the document he was reading, and his fingers, instead of taking the scroll, brushed against the back of her hand. It wasn't a touch. It was a lightning strike. A jolt, white-hot and electric, shot up her arm straight to her core. The air crackled. The scent of ozone and a deep wild forest after a winter storm flooded her senses. For a split second, the world tilted, and all she could see, all she could feel, was him. It was a connection so sudden, so profound, it stole the breath from her lungs. He flinched back as if he'd been burned. His head snapped up, and for the first time, the very first time in 3 years, Alpha King Kalen Darius Blackthorn truly looked at her. His eyes, normally a cold, guarded gold, blazed with a feral, shocked inferno. They weren't the eyes of a king, they were the eyes of a wolf that had just scented something it had been starving for its entire life. Panic seized her. This was not safe. This was the opposite of invisible. This was being seen down to her very soul. "What?" he started, his voice a raw, strangled growl. He stared at her, his gaze intense, confused, hungry. Ilara's training, her very instinct for survival, screamed at her. She snatched her hand back, her face a pale mask of shock. "My apologies, Your Majesty," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. A static shock. A lie, a pathetic, flimsy lie against the roaring truth that had just passed between them. He kept staring, his nostrils flaring slightly. The king was processing. The wolf was recognizing. The war between them was a terrifying storm in his golden eyes. Finally, the king won. His face shuddered, becoming cold, hard granite once more. But the fire was still there, banked, but not extinguished. "Control yourself, Miss Vane," he snarled, the words a whip crack in the silent room. He grabbed the treaty, his knuckles white. "Get out!" She fled. She didn't walk. She fled. As the door clicked shut, she leaned against it, her body trembling, her hand tingling with the phantom heat of his touch. The quiet, gray world she had built for herself had just been shattered into a million pieces. The spark had been lit, and from the inferno in his eyes, she knew, with a certainty that terrified her to her very bones, that it was the start of a fire that would consume them both. Chapter 4. The Scent of a Soul. The council chamber felt colder than usual. Sunlight, thick with dust, streamed through the high stained glass windows, painting the stone floor in colors of blood and gold. But the light offered no warmth. Here, in the heart of power, warmth was a weakness. Ilara stood by the wall, a living shadow in a simple gray dress, her notepad held like a shield. Her purpose was to be unseen, unheard, unthought of. She recorded the minutes of the meeting, her pen scratching softly, the only sound she dared to make. Lord Valerius was droning on about trade tariffs, his voice a self-important buzz. King Kalen sat on his throne of carved obsidian, a figure of bored, lethal stillness. He hadn't moved in an hour. He hadn't spoken. But his power was a physical presence in the room. It was a pressure against the skin, a low hum in the bones that demanded submission. Ilara was used to it. She lived in it. But then something shifted. A strange warmth bloomed in her chest, a soft, unfamiliar pulse. The air grew thick, heavy with a scent she'd never smelled before, wild lavender, old paper, and something ancient, like the smell of the earth after a lightning strike. Her own scent. Why was it so strong today? Her heart began to flutter, a panicked bird in a cage. Something was wrong. She looked up and met the king's eyes.
Pain, grief, emptiness. For 5 years, this was the air Kalen breathed. It was the taste of his food, the fabric of his sleep. His wolf, the great black beast that was the core of his power, was a hollow, aching thing in his soul, pacing the cage of his ribs in restless silence. The council meeting was a dull roar in his ears, meaningless noise. He was a king of ghosts, haunted by the memory of Lyra, his first mate, his murdered mate. Love was a poison. He would never drink it again, because to love was to create a weakness, and his enemies had proven they knew exactly where to strike. Then, it happened. A scent. It didn't just enter the room. It tore through the gray fog of his grief like a bolt of lightning. It was not a perfume. It was elemental. It was the scent of old, forgotten archives and night-blooming moonflowers. It was the scent of a quiet strength and a hidden fire. It was the smell of mine. The word was not his own. It was a roar, a primal, possessive, soul-shaking roar from the beast inside him. His wolf, dormant for 5 years, snapped awake. It lunged against the bars of his control, howling with a desperate, shocking joy. Mate. His head snapped up, his senses zeroing in on the source. His golden eyes scanned the room, past the bowing lords, past the guards, and landed on her. The gray mouse, the quiet, efficient ghost who managed his life. His secretary, Ilara Vane. The scent was pouring from her, a beacon in the darkness, a song only his soul could hear. How had he never noticed it before? How could he have been so blind? The world dissolved into a red haze, control, gone, grief, obliterated. There was only the scent, the woman, the need. It was a physical, clawing thing, demanding he go to her, claim her, mark her as his, right here, right now.
He was moving. He rose from his throne, not with the slow dignity of a king, but with the explosive speed of a predator. The council fell silent, their eyes wide with shock. He crossed the vast chamber in 3 long, silent strides. He didn't see the lords. He didn't see the guards. He only saw her. Terror, cold and absolute, stole her breath. This was it. This was the end of her invisible world. He reached her, his shadow swallowing her whole. His hand shot out, his fingers wrapping around her arm like bands of steel. His touch was a brand, searing her skin. He didn't say a word. He just turned and dragged her from the room, the heavy doors slamming shut behind them, leaving the lords of the kingdom in stunned silence. He slammed her back against the cold stone wall of the corridor. His body pinned her, a wall of heat and muscle. She could feel the wild, frantic thunder of his heart against her own. His face was inches from hers, his eyes blazing with a terrifying feral light. He lowered his head, his nose skimming the sensitive skin of her neck, and he breathed her in. A low, rumbling growl vibrated through his chest, a sound so primal it made her very bones ache. Then he pulled back, his golden eyes locking onto hers, filled with a storm of fury, disbelief, and a raw, possessive hunger that terrified her. "Why?" he snarled, his voice a guttural rasp, a sound ripped from the throat of a beast. "Why do you smell like mine?" The question hung in the air, an accusation and a claim all in one, a hook that snagged her soul and promised to never let go.
Chapter 5. The King's Cage Rage. War. His office was a cage, and he was the beast rattling its bars. He swept a silver decanter from his desk. It smashed against the stone wall, the sound a pale echo of the violence storming inside him. Mine, mate, mine. The words from his wolf were a relentless drumbeat against his skull. For 5 years, the beast had been a whisper of grief. Now it was a roaring inferno demanding he go to her, claim her, finish what had started in that hallway. He couldn't. He wouldn't. He slammed his fist into the wall, the stone cracking under the blow. Pain was a welcome distraction, because the scent of her, that impossible scent of lavender and old magic, clung to him, driving him mad. It was the scent of life, of hope, and hope was the most dangerous poison of all. He remembered another scent. Lilies. Lyra had always smelled of lilies. He remembered finding her in their garden, the scent of her blood overpowering the scent of her flowers. His weakness had killed her. Loving her had put the target on her back. And this new bond? It was a death sentence. To accept this girl, this quiet, fragile nobody, was to paint that same target on her. The thought was a shard of ice in his gut. His wolf didn't understand. It only knew want, need, protect, claim. But the man knew better. To protect her, he had to reject her. To save her, he had to crush this bond before it could fully form. It was a cold, brutal logic born from the deepest trauma. He would be her king, her boss, but never her mate. He would rather live in this hell of emptiness forever than watch another mate die because of him. The decision felt like tearing his own soul in two, but it was the only way. Could a king so powerful be so trapped by his own past?
Her room felt like a prison cell. A very comfortable prison cell, but a prison nonetheless. Guards stood outside her door. They weren't there for her protection. She knew that. They were there to keep her in. After the confrontation in the hall, she had been escorted here with cold, formal efficiency. She was no longer a secretary. She was a problem. A complication. The king scented. Her arm still throbbed where he had grabbed her, a phantom heat that wouldn't fade. Her mind replayed the look in his eyes, that raw, wild hunger. It should have terrified her, and it did. But underneath the terror, a strange, treacherous warmth stirred. A low hum deep inside her, a silver thread of awareness that stretched from her chest through the castle walls straight to the king's tower. She could feel his rage, his pain, as a distant storm on the edge of her own senses. What was this? This was the open loop, the mystery of the bond, a connection she couldn't explain but could no longer deny. A soft knock came at the door. She expected a servant with food. Instead, Beta Marcus entered, his face a mask of gentle concern. Marcus, the king's right hand, was always polite, always proper. He had been fiercely loyal to Luna Lyra. "Ilara," he said, his voice smooth as honey. "The king is unwell. I wanted to see how you were faring." "I am fine, Beta," she replied, her voice steady, professional. It was the only defense she had. He stepped closer, his eyes scanning her face. "This must be very confusing for you. A bond. It is a sacred, powerful thing. But circumstances, they can be complicated." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "The king has not been himself since we lost Luna Lyra. He is protective of her memory. He would not want to see it dishonored. The threat was there, wrapped in silk. You are not worthy to replace her." A familiar coldness settled in her stomach. It was the same message she'd heard her whole life. "You are nothing." She simply nodded. "I understand." "Good." Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his cold, assessing eyes. "Just remember your place, my dear, for your own sake." His visit was a hook, a subtle thread of political maneuvering that she now found herself tangled in. As the door clicked shut, Ilara was left with the cold echo of his words and the turbulent storm of the king's emotions raging somewhere down the hall. She was caught between a king who couldn't control his own soul and a court that had already judged her. Her escape fund suddenly felt 1,000,000 miles away.
Chapter 6. The Unspoken Law. The war inside him had reached a ceasefire. A cold, hard, brittle one. His wolf was sullen, pacing in the back of his mind, snarling its displeasure. But the man, the king, was back in control. Control was everything. It was the wall he had built around his heart, stone by painful stone after Lyra's death. This feeling for his secretary was a crack in that wall, and he had to seal it. Now. He sent for her. Waiting for her to arrive was its own special kind of torture. Her scent, a phantom on the air, was already making his wolf stir. "Mate is close. Go to her." Protect. He clenched his fists, his claws pricking the skin of his palms. No. He had to do this. He had to sever this before it grew roots. Because roots meant connection, and connection meant a vulnerability he could not afford. Not again. She entered, and the air in the room changed. It thickened. It warmed. The scent of her, that damn scent of lavender and ancient magic, filled his lungs, and it was like breathing after drowning. His wolf surged, a wave of possessive joy that he had to brutally shove back down. He kept his face a mask of cold indifference. He had to be cruel. Cruelty was a kindness he could offer her, a shield against the fate that awaited anyone who got too close to him. To accept her is to sentence her to death. To claim her is to bury her. To love her is to lose her.
Walking into his office felt like walking into a predator's den. After the chaos in the hallway, the room was now unnaturally still. He stood by the window, his back to her, a monolith of contained power. The silver thread of connection between them hummed with a tense, painful energy. Her goal was to get through this, to survive whatever judgment he was about to deliver, and to retreat back into the shadows he had so violently ripped her from. "You summoned me, Your Majesty," she said, her voice a perfect, professional calm. She would not let him see her fear. She would not let him see how his rejection in the hallway had felt like a physical blow. He turned slowly. His eyes were no longer blazing with feral fire. They were chips of cold, dead gold. It was somehow worse. "Miss Vane," he began, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. "What happened in the council chamber today was a momentary lapse, an anomaly." She simply nodded, her hands clasped in front of her, waiting. "In our world," he continued, taking a slow step toward her, "there are instincts, primal urges. They are a relic of a wilder time, and they must be controlled, governed, by law and by will." Another step. He was closer now. Close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, close enough that her own pulse began to race in a frantic, unwilling rhythm. "The laws of this kingdom are clear," he said, his voice dropping, becoming a low, dangerous rumble. "The royal line must remain pure. The alpha must be mated to a wolf of significant lineage, you understand." It wasn't a question. It was a dismissal of her entire existence. He was branding her half-blood nobody all over again, but this time it was a king doing the branding. The old shame, the familiar feeling of being worthless, coiled in her stomach. But 3 years of serving this man had forged a spine of steel within her. She would not crumble. "I am aware of the laws, Your Majesty," she said, her voice quiet but firm.
Her composure was a physical blow. He wanted her to cry, to scream, to make this easy for him. But she just stood there, a statue of quiet dignity, and it made the lies taste like acid in his throat. His wolf clawed at him. "Liar. She is ours. She is everything." He ignored it. He had to finish this. "Therefore," he said, the word like a death sentence, "whatever this anomaly was, it is a mistake. It does not exist. You are my secretary, nothing more. Your duties will continue as they always have. Is that understood?" He was so close now he could see the faint, frantic pulse at the base of her throat. His fangs ached. The urge to lean down and sink his teeth into that perfect, scented skin. To mark her, claim her, and silence all the lies was a physical agony. Because every instinct screamed that she was his, he had to force the words out. "Is that understood?" She met his gaze, and for a second he saw the deep, shattering hurt in her eyes before she masked it. "Perfectly, Your Majesty," she whispered. "I am your secretary." Relief warred with a soul-crushing despair. He had done it. He had protected her. He had saved her from himself. So why did it feel like he had just ripped out his own heart? He turned away, unable to look at her any longer. "You are dismissed." She turned, her back straight, her footsteps silent as she walked towards the door. It was over. The bond was denied. The world was safe again. Gray, Empty. Safe. Then, through the window, he saw him. The captain of the guard, a young, arrogant alpha, standing in the corridor. As Alara opened the door, the captain's eyes lit up and he gave her a charming, wolfish smile. Something inside Kaelin snapped. The control he had fought so hard for shattered into a million pieces. The beast surged forward and the king was gone. "Miss Vane," he snarled, the sound a low, possessive growl that ripped from his throat. She froze at the door, her hand on the handle. He didn't look at her, but his eyes were locked on the captain's smiling face through the window. Stay away from the captain of the guard. The order was absolute. It was not the voice of a king to his secretary. It was the sound of an alpha, claiming what was his. The war was not over. It had just begun.
Chapter 7. A Kingdom of Whispers Frozen. That was the only word for it. Her hand was on the cold brass handle of the door, the king's growl still vibrating in the air behind her, a primal, possessive sound that made a mockery of his cold denial. In the corridor, the captain of the guard, a handsome, arrogant alpha named Lucian, stared, his charming smile wiped clean from his face, replaced by wide-eyed shock and a healthy dose of fear. He looked from Alara to the closed door and back again, then gave a short, stiff bow and practically fled down the hall. The king's words had been a slap, a brutal dismissal of her worth. But that growl, that was something else entirely. It was a claim, a warning, an earthquake that shook the foundations of the reality he had just tried to build. She fled, too. Not from the captain, but from the dizzying, terrifying contradiction of the king himself. Following that chaotic confrontation, the castle transformed. Before, she had been invisible. Now she was a spectacle. The whispers were no longer behind her back. They were a constant, rushing river of sound she had to wade through every day. She felt hundreds of eyes on her. The lords of the council watched her with a mixture of pity and contempt. The female staff looked at her with envy and suspicion. Some of the younger, unmated alphas watched her with a new, predatory light in their eyes, as if she were a prize to be stolen from a dragon who refused to guard his hoard. Her professional mask was the only thing that got her through it. Smile politely, nod. Keep moving. Don't let them see you bleed. Her goal was simply to breathe.
He was losing his mind. After his pathetic, instinct-driven snarl, he'd retreated into a fortress of fury. Fury at himself for his weakness, fury at his wolf for its smug satisfaction, and a white-hot, possessive fury at the thought of any other man even looking at her. The forced proximity of their work, once a tolerable arrangement, was now a refined form of torture. He noticed things now, things he had forced himself to ignore for 3 years. He noticed the precise, elegant curve of her handwriting. He noticed the way she tucked a stray strand of dark hair behind her ear when she was concentrating. He noticed the quiet, calming scent of lavender and old books that now seemed to cling to every surface in his office, a constant, maddening reminder of her. She was a flame in his gray, empty world, and he was a moth terrified of being burned alive, because he knew what happened to beautiful things in his life. They were broken. They were taken. He was watching her from the upper gallery as she crossed the great hall. She walked with her head held high, a small, defiant ship in a sea of hostile whispers. And then he saw him. Ronan, the rival alpha. His childhood friend turned bitter enemy. Ronan, with his slick charm and his snake smile, cornered her near the hearth.
"Miss Vane," a smooth voice purred beside her. She turned to find Alpha Ronan, his eyes a startling, intelligent green. He was handsome, charming, and radiated an easy confidence that was the complete opposite of Kaelin's oppressive power. "Alpha Ronan," she replied, her voice even. "A difficult position you find yourself in," he said, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial murmur. He gestured vaguely towards the watching courtiers. "To be the object of a king's attention, and his denial. It can be dangerous." "I am the king's secretary," she said, the words tasting like a well-rehearsed lie. Ronan laughed, a low, pleasant sound. "Of course, but some of us see more than a secretary. We see a woman of grace and strength weathering a storm she did not ask for." He leaned in closer, his scent of pine and ambition reaching her. "Just know that not everyone in this kingdom believes you should be hidden away. A king who hides his treasures is a fool who deserves to have them stolen." The words were a direct challenge, an offer, a threat. Before she could respond, she felt it. A wave of pure, murderous rage rolling down from the gallery above. It was so potent, so overwhelming, it made the air feel thin. She looked up and saw him, Kalen, staring down at them, his hands clenched on the stone balustrade, his knuckles white. His face was a mask of cold fury, but his eyes were pure gold, pure wolf. Ronan saw him too. He gave her a slow, deliberate smile before turning and walking away, leaving Alara alone in the crosshairs of a silent, terrifying war she was just beginning to understand. Chapter 8. The Feral Soul. The storm broke that night. Rain lashed against the tall Gothic windows of the king's office, the wind howling a mournful song that seemed to echo the turmoil in Alara's own heart. In light of Ronan's public challenge, the tension between her and Kalen had become an unbearable living thing. They were the only two left in the royal wing, working late to finish a new set of trade decrees. Every tick of the grand clock on the mantel felt like a hammer blow. Every rustle of parchment was a gunshot in the crushing silence. She could feel him struggling. He hadn't looked at her directly since the incident with Ronan, but his awareness of her was a palpable force. He paced the room like a caged panther, his power crackling in the air, making the candles on his desk flicker and dance. He was a storm in human form, and she was trapped in the eye of it. Her goal was to finish the work and escape before the storm broke. The denial was taking its toll on him. She could see it. There were new, fine lines of strain around his eyes. A muscle in his jaw jumped and twitched. The bond, that silver thread between them, was humming with his pain, his agitation. It was a strange, unwelcome intimacy, feeling the edges of his fraying control. Was this what the book meant by a feral soul? A powerful wolf without its anchor? A drenched and mud-spattered courier was suddenly shown in by the guard, his face grim. He bowed low. "Your Majesty, urgent news from the northern border." Kalen stopped pacing. "Speak." "The Bloodfang pack has raided the border settlements," the courier said, his voice trembling slightly. "Dozens are dead. They've taken the winter stores from 3 villages." The words hung in the air, heavy and bloody. Alara's pen froze over the parchment. This was a direct act of war, a challenge to the king's authority. The news was the final straw, a sound ripped from Kalen's throat. A low, guttural snarl of pure, unrestrained fury. His eyes, they bled from gold to a burning molten red. "They dare—" He wasn't speaking to any of them. He was speaking to the insult, to the attack on his people, his land. He turned, his movement a blur, and swept a stack of heavy, leather-bound books from his desk. They crashed to the floor with a sound like thunder. His claws, long and black and wickedly sharp, sliced through the air, shredding the very fabric of the silence. The courier and the guard shrank back, their faces pale with terror. This wasn't just anger. This was the king losing control. This was the feral soul breaking free.
Red. All he saw was red. The report of the attack was a torch to a barrel of gunpowder. His people, dead. His territory, violated. The beast inside him roared, clawing for release, demanding blood and vengeance. The carefully constructed walls of his control crumbled to dust. The grief, the rage, the agony of the denied bond, it all coalesced into a single blinding point of feral fury. He wanted to tear something apart. He wanted to feel bones snap beneath his claws. He was losing it. He could feel the change beginning, the burn in his muscles, the shift in his bones. He was going to transform. Right here. And he was going to kill someone.
Her old self would have run. She would have screamed. She would have made herself small and invisible and prayed the storm would pass her by. But the woman who had faced down alphas and endured the whispers of a kingdom did not run. Because she was beginning to understand that running wouldn't solve anything. As he raised a hand to bring it crashing down on his desk, his claws fully extended, she moved. She didn't think. She just acted. "Kaylin," she said. Her voice wasn't loud. It wasn't a command. It was soft but steady, a single solid note in the roaring chaos. He froze. His head snapped toward her, his eyes still burning red, his teeth bared in a snarl. The beast was looking at her, but it was listening. "Kaylin," she said again, taking a small, hesitant step forward. "Breathe." He stared at her, his chest heaving. The red in his eyes flickered, warring with the gold. He looked from her to his own hand, at the deadly claws extended from his fingertips as if seeing them for the first time. A look of profound shock and self-loathing passed over his face. The beast retreated, snarling, back into its cage. The red faded completely, leaving only his golden eyes, wide with a raw new emotion. It was a terrifying mixture of shame, resentment, and a desperate, undeniable need. He had lost control, and she, a half-blood nobody, had been the only thing to pull him back from the brink. They had just learned a new, dangerous rule of their connection. She was his anchor. He stared at her for a long, silent moment, the air thick with the aftermath of his storm. Then he turned to the terrified courier. "Triple the border patrols. I want the Bloodfang Alpha's head on a spike before the next full moon." His voice was iron again. The king was back. He turned back to Alara, his face an unreadable mask. "You are dismissed." She left without a word, but the dynamic between them had changed forever. It was no longer just a denied bond. It was a connection that held the king's very sanity in its hands. Chapter 9. The Ghost on the Throne. The library was her sanctuary, but now even here she felt exposed. After the terrifying display in his office, Alara was more driven than ever. What he had become, that feral, uncontrolled rage. It was the same energy she'd read about in the forbidden texts, the feral soul. And her voice, her presence, had been the key to locking it back in its cage. As a result, the question of her heritage was no longer just about her own identity. It was about the stability of the king himself. Her goal was no longer just to find her past, but to understand her present power. She found the section on purged bloodlines again, her fingers tracing the faded script about the lichens. She had to know more. She had to understand what she was, what this strange power over him meant. Was she a weapon? A cure? Or just another vulnerability waiting to be exploited? Dangerous history, Miss Vane. The voice, smooth and cold, made her jump. Beta Marcus stood at the end of the aisle, his arms crossed, a pleasant but utterly fake smile on his face. He moved with a predator's silence she had never noticed before. "Beta Marcus," she said, closing the heavy book. "I was just cross-referencing some trade histories." "Of course you were," he said, his eyes glinting. He walked slowly toward her, his gaze falling on the title of the book in her hands. "It is admirable, your dedication to your work." Luna Lyra was much the same. A brilliant mind. She understood that a king's mate is not just his heart, but his shield. Every word was a carefully aimed dart. He was painting a picture of a perfect, powerful queen, and in the empty spaces, he was painting Alara as the opposite. A story to make her feel small. "She was a true pureblood alpha," Marcus continued, his voice filled with a theatrical reverence. Her lineage was a fortress that protected Kaylin. It gave his reign a legitimacy that no one could question. Her strength was his strength. I am his secretary, Beta, Alara repeated, her voice colder this time. Nothing more. Yes, Marcus said, his smile tightening. You keep saying that, but whispers have a life of their own, don't they? They can be dangerous for everyone involved. He stopped in front of her, his voice dropping. The stability of the king is the stability of the kingdom. I'm sure you agree. Any distraction must be handled swiftly and permanently. The threat was no longer veiled. It was a cold, hard stone dropped into the silence between them. This was a clear warning. It was a promise. This conversation was a hook, revealing his true nature as a ruthless political operator. His eyes fell to the book in her hands again. The Great Purge. He read the chapter title, his feigned pleasantness vanishing completely. His eyes narrowed into icy slits. Some things are buried for a reason, Miss Vane. Digging them up can soil your hands, or worse. Alara's heart was pounding, but she held his gaze. She would not be intimidated. She would not be the scared little girl who hid in the shadows. That girl was gone. History is only dangerous to those who have something to hide, Beta. A flicker of something, surprise, anger, crossed his face before he smoothed it over again. He gave her a chillingly calm smile. A clever answer. But cleverness is not the same as wisdom. He leaned in, his voice a bare whisper. The ghost of a great queen sits on that throne beside him. Be careful she doesn't mistake you for a threat to her legacy. He turned and walked away, leaving Alara with a racing heart and a terrifying new certainty. This wasn't just about a broken king and a forbidden bond anymore. Marcus was not just protecting a memory. He was actively guarding a secret. A secret connected to Luna Lyra, the Purge, and the very power that was awakening inside her. The ghost on the throne wasn't Lyra. It was the dark, buried history of their people. And Marcus had just made it clear he would kill to keep it buried. The stakes had just risen from her heart to her very life. Chapter 10. The Alpha's Gambit. The weight of Beta Marcus's threat was a physical thing, a cold stone in her stomach. Every shadow in the castle now seemed to hold a hidden warning, every whisper a potential lie. He wasn't just a loyal Beta. He was a gatekeeper, guarding a history he was willing to kill for. Her goal was no longer simply to survive the king's moods. Now, she had to survive his court. She sought solace in the castle gardens, the scent of damp earth and late-blooming roses a small comfort in the suffocating political air. He offers you a cage, Miss Vane, a very cold, very lonely cage. The voice was smooth, confident. Alpha Ronan emerged from behind a weeping willow, his green eyes missing nothing. He moved with an easy grace that was a world away from Kaelin's coiled, violent stillness. Alpha Ronan, she said, her voice tight. I am not in a cage. Aren't you? He asked, stepping closer. He gestured back toward the stone behemoth of the castle. You are tied to a king who rejects you, watched by a court that despises you, and haunted by the ghost of a dead queen. He offered her a soft, sympathetic smile. It was a practiced political thing, but it was also tempting. He is broken, Alara. We all know it. He is obsessed with a memory, and he is letting his kingdom and you suffer for it. Since their last encounter, his approach had changed. It was more direct, more intimate. He was no longer just testing the waters. What do you want? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I want to offer you an alternative, he said, his voice dropping. A throne, not a cage. A position of honor in my pack by my side. I would not deny you. I would not hide you. I would celebrate you. It was a story of a different life, a life of respect and power, and for a moment, she let herself imagine it. What would that be like? To be wanted, not just as a mate, but as an ally. A shadow fell over them.
He had seen Ronan follow her into the gardens. The sight sent a hot, black rage coursing through his veins. He'd followed, staying hidden in the shadows of the colonnade, listening. Every word from Ronan's mouth was a perfectly aimed arrow, designed to prey on her insecurity and his failure. He is broken. He offers you a cage. The words were true, and that made them burn all the hotter. His wolf snarled, a low, rumbling growl in his chest. Ours. Go to ours. Drive the snake away. When Ronan spoke of offering her a throne, something inside Kaelin broke. The control, the denial, the carefully constructed walls, they all came crashing down. He didn't walk out of the shadows. He stalked. He appeared before them, his presence a sudden, suffocating drop in temperature. He ignored Ronan completely. His eyes, molten gold and blazing with possessive fury, were locked on Alara. "We are leaving," he said, his voice a low, dangerous command. Ronan stepped slightly in front of Alara, a subtle act of protection that was also a blatant challenge. "She is in the middle of a conversation, Kaelin." "This conversation is over," Kaelin growled, the sound vibrating in the air. "Is it?" Ronan asked, his voice deceptively light. "Or are you simply afraid of what she might choose if given a real choice?" That was it. The final push. Because the thought of her choosing another was an agony he couldn't bear, he moved. He grabbed Alara's arm, not gently, and pulled her from behind Ronan, positioning her at his side. He turned his furious gaze on his rival. "She is mine to deal with," he snarled. The words were brutal. Possessive. The words of an owner, not a mate. He didn't wait for a reply. He turned and dragged Alara with him, away from the gardens, away from Ronan's cold, calculating smile. The emotional whiplash was staggering. He had just claimed her in a way, but it was a claim born of rage and jealousy, not love or affection. He was treating her like a disputed territory, not a person, and he knew, with a sickening certainty, that he was only driving her further away even as he held her tighter.
Chapter 11. The Eye of the Storm. The storm that had been brewing inside the castle for days finally broke. A furious, violent tempest descended, rattling the window panes and sending sheets of rain against the cold stone. It was a perfect mirror for the fury raging inside Kaelin's office, where he had dragged Alara after the confrontation with Ronan. "What were you thinking?" he roared, finally letting go of her arm. He began to pace, a caged lion lashing its tail. "Letting him speak to you like that? Letting him fill your head with his poison?" Following his public display of possession, his anger was a raw, open wound. Alara stood her ground, rubbing her arm where the imprint of his fingers was already beginning to purple. Something inside her, worn down by the whispers, the threats, and his constant emotional whiplash, finally snapped. Her fear was burned away by a clean, sharp anger. "What was I thinking?" she shot back, her voice shaking but clear. "What about you? You reject me. You name me a mistake in front of the entire court. You tell me I am nothing but your secretary, and then you dare to growl at another man for looking at me?" He stopped pacing. He stared at her, shocked into silence by her defiance. No one spoke to him like that. "What right do you have?" she pressed on, tears of pure frustration stinging her eyes. "You don't want me, Kaelin, but you don't want anyone else to have me either. You want to keep me in a cage of your own making, not as a mate, but as a thing, a possession you can ignore until someone else shows interest." Her words struck him harder than any physical blow, because she was right, utterly, devastatingly right. The anger drained out of him, leaving behind a raw, gaping void of desperation. The storm outside raged, but the storm inside him stilled, silenced by her pain. He crossed the room in 2 strides. The air crackled. The scent of him, of rain and rage, and a deep, aching loneliness filled her senses. "It's not like that," he whispered, his voice ragged. "Then what is it like?" she choked out, looking up at him. He didn't have the words, so he showed her. His mouth crashed down on hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a storm. It was a collision of pain and denial, and a desperate, starved hunger that had been caged for 5 long years. It was brutal, it was punishing, it was everything. She gasped against his lips, and he took the sound as an invitation, deepening the kiss, one hand tangling in her hair, the other pressing her hard against the cold stone wall. Her mind screamed no, but her body, her soul, screamed yes.
The taste of her was his undoing. She tasted of quiet strength and hidden sweetness and a fierce, surprising fire. His wolf howled in triumph. Mate, finally, take her, mark her, make her ours. The man, the broken king, was gone. There was only the wolf, only the need. He broke the kiss only to trail his mouth down her jaw, to the frantic, fluttering pulse in her neck. Her scent was driving him insane. He could feel his fangs lengthening, aching with a primal, undeniable urge. The bite, the mark, to make her his. Forever. He opened his mouth, ready to claim her, to end this agony, to finally have her. A flash of lightning lit up the room, stark and white. And in that split second, the image of her was replaced by another. Lyra, lying in the garden, her white dress stained red, her eyes wide and empty. The scent of lilies and blood. Weakness. You were weak. Your love killed her.
The trauma hit him like an invisible fist. He recoiled from her as if he'd been physically burned. He stumbled back, his chest heaving, his face a mask of pure horror. He stared at his own hands, then at her, his eyes wide with self-loathing. "Gods, Alara," he choked out, his voice trembling, broken. "If I taste you now, I will burn the world down for a second sip." And then he was gone. He fled the room, leaving her gasping against the wall, her body humming with a pleasure so sharp it was a pain, her lips bruised and the phantom aching pressure of his fangs still on her neck. The game had changed. The bond was no longer a secret whisper. It was a roaring inferno that had almost consumed them both, and the terror in his eyes promised a terrible fallout to come. Chapter 12. The Gilded Cage. The aftermath of the kiss was a deafening silence. Ilara remained pressed against the wall, her body a live wire of sensation. Her lips tingled. Her skin burned where he had touched her, and the spot on her neck where his fangs had grazed her skin ached with a deep phantom throb. A deep part of her, a part she didn't know existed, had wanted the bite. The thought was terrifying. She was terrified of him, of his lack of control, but she was even more terrified of herself, of the raw, primal desire he had awakened in her. She stumbled back to her rooms, the storm outside a pale imitation of the one in her soul. She was lost. Was she a prisoner of his denial, or a prisoner of her own awakening desire? What was she supposed to do now? Confronted by this new reality, she felt a sense of impending doom. Something had broken in him tonight, and she knew he would not let such a profound loss of control go unanswered.
Panic, cold, slick, and absolute. It was a feeling he hadn't felt since the night he found Lyra. He had almost done it. He had almost marked Ilara. He had almost signed her death warrant with his own teeth. He paced his chambers, the ghost of her taste still on his lips, her scent still clinging to his skin. His wolf was a wounded, snarling thing, enraged by his denial. You hurt her. You left her. Coward. The wolf was right, but the man knew a deeper truth. Proximity was the problem. He could not be near her. He could not breathe her air, see her face, and be expected to resist the pull of his own soul. He couldn't trust himself. Therefore, he had to protect her from the greatest threat in the kingdom. Him. The decision was made in the cold, logical part of his brain that had been forged by grief and trauma. It was brutal. It was necessary. It was the only way. He summoned the captain of his personal guard. Ready a carriage. Miss Vane is to be relocated, immediately. Your Majesty? The captain asked, confused. To the northern villa, Kalen said, his voice flat and dead. She is to be kept comfortable, and she is to be guarded. No one gets in or out without my express command. It is for her safety. He told himself the lie, repeating it over and over. I'm protecting her from Ronan. I'm protecting her from court enemies. But the truth was a shard of ice in his heart. I am protecting her from me.
The knock on her door was heavy, official. It wasn't Kaelin. It was 4 royal guards, their faces grim and unreadable. The captain stepped forward. "Miss Vane," he said, not meeting her eyes. "By order of the king, you are to be relocated. Please gather your things. We leave within the hour." Relocated? The word was so sterile, so impersonal. Relocated where? Why? She asked, her voice small. "To the northern villa for your safety," the captain recited, the words clearly memorized. "His Majesty has not offered further details." The blood drained from her face. The northern villa. It was a beautiful, remote estate. A fortress in the middle of nowhere. It was a place you sent political prisoners you didn't want to execute. A gilded cage. After that kiss, after that raw, soul-bearing moment of connection, this was his answer. Not words. Not an explanation. Just a cold, clinical command delivered by his soldiers. He was casting her out. He was hiding her. He was burying his dirty little secret in the countryside. The humiliation was a physical blow, so much worse than his first denial. Because this was not just a rejection of the bond. It was a rejection of her, the person. As the guards led her through the deserted corridors of the castle, a prisoner in all but name, she looked up at the royal balcony. And she saw him. Beta Marcus. He was watching her departure, a small, almost imperceptible smile of pure victory on his lips. And in that moment, she understood. This wasn't just Kaelin's fear. This was a political execution. She had been outmaneuvered. The chapter ended with the heavy castle gates closing behind her carriage, shutting her out from the only place she could find answers, her heart a solid block of ice and a single burning thought in her mind. This was not just a rejection. This was war. Chapter 13, I Will Not Be Your Shame. The northern villa was a masterpiece of deception. Sunlight streamed through pristine glass windows, illuminating rooms filled with plush silks and polished mahogany. The scent of jasmine and honeysuckle drifted in from the perfectly manicured gardens. It was beautiful. It was luxurious. It was a cage. Every comfort felt like an insult. Every beautiful view a reminder of the bars she could not see. The silence here was different from the castle's. It was a smothering, empty thing designed to break her spirit. Following his panicked decision, Kaelin had thrown her away. After the raw honesty of that kiss, after the terrifying vulnerability in his eyes, he had chosen to bury her. He thought this cage would keep her safe. He thought this silence would make her forget. He was wrong. For a week, she had endured it. She had eaten the fine food, slept in the soft bed, and felt the betrayal fester inside her, hardening from a painful wound into a cold, sharp diamond of resolve. Her old self, the invisible girl, would have accepted this fate. She would have waited, hoping he might change his mind, praying for him to come and rescue her. But that girl had died in the castle corridors, drowned in the whispers of the court, and burned in the fire of his kiss. A new woman had been forged. Her goal was no longer to survive him or to understand him. Her goal was to reclaim herself. Because he had shown her that his fear was stronger than the bond, she knew she could not rely on him. She began to plan. The very skills that had made her the perfect, invisible secretary now made her the perfect, invisible strategist. She observed. She listened. The guards changed shifts at the chime of the 4th morning bell. A supply wagon arrived every 3rd day, its driver lazy and unobservant. A section of the garden wall, overgrown with ancient ivy, was crumbling and rarely patrolled. She gathered small things: a paring knife from a fruit tray, a length of rope from a drapery tieback, a small pouch of dried meat and bread. Her heart didn't pound with fear. It beat with a slow, steady, determined rhythm. This was not an act of panic. It was an act of rebellion, an act of self-worth. She would not be a ghost in his past. She would not be a secret he kept locked away. She would not be the living embodiment of his shame. On the 7th night, under the sliver of a new moon, she was ready. She sat at the elegant writing desk, the same kind she had once stocked with ink for the king, and took out a single sheet of creamy parchment. Her hand did not shake. The words were simple. They were clean. They were the truest thing she had ever written. I will not be your shame. She didn't sign it. He would know who it was from. She left the note on the perfectly made bed, a stark white flag of surrender to a war she refused to fight on his terms. Then, cloaked in shadows, she slipped from her room, a ghost of a different kind now. A ghost fleeing her own grave. As she scaled the crumbling garden wall, the rough stone biting into her palms, she did not look back. She was choosing the dangerous unknown wilderness over the suffocating safety of his cage. This was her point of no return. A commitment not to him or the bond, but to the woman she was determined to become.
Chapter 14. The Severed Thread. The castle was a tomb. Without Alara's presence, the silence that had once been his refuge was now a hollow, ringing agony. He tried to work, he tried to rule, but every document reminded him of her precise handwriting. Every shadow in the corner of his eye looked like her, and the very air in his office felt thin, stripped of her calming scent. The bond was a taut, frayed wire stretched across hundreds of miles, a constant aching thrum of loss and loneliness in his soul. His wolf was a miserable, surly beast, refusing to speak to him, communicating only in waves of bitter resentment. You drove her away. You caged our mate. Fool. He told himself he had done the right thing. She was safe. Safe from Ronan. Safe from Marcus and his political games. Safe from him. The thought was a cold, bitter comfort. It was a lie he repeated like a prayer, a justification for the gaping hole in his chest. The doors to his office burst open without a knock. It was the captain of the villa's guard, his face pale, his breathing ragged. Your Majesty. Kalen was on his feet in an instant. What is it? She's gone. The words hit him like a physical blow. Gone? How? He had built that cage himself, made it impenetrable. The captain held out a single sheet of parchment. Kalen snatched it from his hand. 5 simple words. I will not be your shame. The air left his lungs. His meticulously constructed walls of logic and control shattered into dust. He had tried to protect her, but all he had done was inflict the one wound she would never tolerate: humiliation. He had treated her like a shameful secret, and she, with her quiet, unshakable dignity, had refused to accept it. His plan had not just failed, it had backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable. A roar of pure, desperate fury tore from his throat.
The freedom was as sharp and cold as the mountain air. The bond pain was a real thing, a constant, dull ache in the center of her chest, a phantom limb that had been amputated. But with the pain came a fierce, exhilarating sense of liberty. She was cold, she was hungry, and she was being hunted. She had no doubt about that, but she was free. For the first time in her life, her path was her own. Following her escape, she kept to the thickest parts of the forest. After a day, she stumbled upon a clearing. A scene of casual cruelty was unfolding. A hulking, brutish patrol captain, his face scarred and twisted into a sneer, had a young Omega wolf pinned to the ground. The boy couldn't be more than 16. I told you to muck out my stalls, pup! The captain, Vorlag, snarled, his boot pressing down on the boy's neck. Did you think I was asking? I had to deliver rations to the Eastern Watchtower. The boy wheezed. Excuses! Vorlag roared, raising his fist. The old Ilara would have hidden. She would have averted her eyes and scurried away, her heart pounding. But the old Ilara was gone. She stepped into the clearing. Captain Vorlag, Her voice was calm. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the captain's anger like a razor. He turned, his eyes widening in shock to see her. The other guards in his patrol shifted, uncertain. "You're the—" he started, his brain catching up. "The king's secretary." "That is correct," Alara said, taking another step. She looked not at him, but at his boot on the young wolf's neck. "And as the king's former secretary, I am intimately familiar with pack law. I seem to recall a section, Article 7, Paragraph 4, that states all Omegas are under the Alpha's direct protection. An attack on one is an attack on the king himself. You are a captain, not a king. Remove your boot. Stand down." Silence. Vorlag stared at her, his jaw working. He was bigger, stronger, an alpha used to getting his way through brute force, but she wasn't challenging his strength. She was challenging his authority with a weapon he didn't have, knowledge. He was being stared down by a half-blood nobody in front of his own men. With a final, furious snarl, he took his boot off the boy's neck. "You'll regret this," he spat, before turning and stalking away, his men following uncertainly. The young Omega looked up at Alara, his eyes filled with a stunned, unwavering devotion. The story would spread. The king's rejected mate, the quiet secretary, had faced down the brute Vorlag with nothing but the law. It was the first small stone in the foundation of her own power, a ripple of respect that would soon become a wave. He was a beast. He had let his wolf take over, its senses far superior to his own. The world was a symphony of scents and sounds. He could smell the crushed leaves where she had walked, the faint, lingering scent of her fear, and her determination. He was half mad with worry and a rage so profound it was a physical sickness. Then the report came. One of his scouts, breathless. "Your Majesty, we have news. Alpha Ronan's wolves. They were seen massing near the ravine. It seems he has made his move." Ronan. The red haze descended again. The frame-up was working perfectly. Ronan had taken her. He would start a war. He would burn Ronan's entire territory to the ground. He would salt the earth where his keep once stood. He turned to his warriors, ready to give the order, ready to unleash a bloody, brutal war. "My king!" Another scout, this one from a different patrol, galloped into the clearing. He held up a small, shimmering object. "We found this. On the trail. It was deliberately placed." Kalen froze. He knew that hairpin. He remembered the day he'd seen it in her hair, the way it caught the light. He had told her it looked like a sliver of the moon, a compliment he had immediately regretted because of the flicker of surprised hope it had put in her eyes. He took the hairpin, the metal cold against his skin. This changed everything. This was a message. Ronan, with his arrogance, would have launched a direct assault, a show of force. This was calculated. This was subtle. This was an assassin's move, not a rival's. The mercenaries, the attempt to frame Ronan. It was a web of lies. The rage that had been a roaring fire transformed. It became something colder, sharper, more lethal. The red haze cleared from his vision, replaced by a chilling, absolute clarity. He wasn't just hunting for his mate anymore. He was hunting a traitor in his own court, and he had a very, very good idea of who it was.
Chapter 16. A calculated rescue. The red haze was gone. In its place was a chilling, crystalline focus. The wolf was still there, a coiled spring of feral rage in his chest. But the man, the king, the hunter, was in control. The hairpin was a cold, hard piece of undeniable truth in his palm. Alara was not with Ronan. She had been taken by a third party, a traitor. And that traitor had tried to point his sword at a rival. Marcus. The name was a hiss of venom in his mind. He was being played. His grief, his rage, his bond, all of it was being used as a weapon against him. But a king is never more dangerous than when he is underestimated. His goal was no longer a blind, furious rescue. It was a hunt. He would play the part Marcus had written for him, but he would write the ending. The intel was correct, Kalen announced to his elite guard, his voice a low, cold rumble that promised violence. Ronan has her. We move now. No prisoners. He saw the flicker of triumph in Marcus's eyes from across the command tent and knew he had taken the bait. He let Marcus's scouts lead them on a wild goose chase toward Ronan's lands, while he and his 5 most trusted wolves broke away, following the true trail. The trail his wolf could scent. The trail that smelled of Alara's fear and her stubborn, unyielding spirit.
The mercenary camp was a dirty makeshift thing in a damp, mossy hollow. Her captors were rough, their talk crude. They thought she was a fragile prize, a key to a king's treasury. They were wrong. She listened. She watched. She gathered information like she once gathered administrative reports. They worked for a benefactor they called the Serpent. They were to be paid handsomely once Ronan was blamed for her kidnapping, and the ensuing war destabilized the region. It was a cold, calculated political move, and she was the pawn at the center of it. Her heart ached with a dull, constant throb, the stretched, painful bond. Did Kalen even know she was gone? Or did he think she was with Ronan? The thought that he might believe she had run to his rival was a fresh, sharp stab of pain. Because she had left him, she had given his enemies the perfect weapon to use against them both. The attack came at dusk. There was no warning, no battle cry. Just a sudden, terrifying silence as the forest itself seemed to come alive with shadows. One moment, her guards were laughing around a fire. The next, they were gone, dragged into the darkness by blurs of black fur and silent, lethal force. And then she saw him. He wasn't a king. He was a force of nature. He moved through the camp like a wraith of death, his eyes glowing gold in the twilight, his face a mask of terrible, focused rage. It was not the out-of-control fury she had seen before. This was different. This was the cold, efficient violence of an executioner. It was terrifying. And it was all for her. The big human who had first grabbed her made a last desperate move. As Kalen tore through the other mercenaries, the man lunged for Alara, a wicked-looking dagger in his hand. It was not a move to hold her hostage. It was a move to finish the job. She tried to scramble away, but her hands were still tied. The man swung the dagger. A blur of black fur intercepted him. Kalen. There was a wet, sickening crunch as Kalen's claws tore through the man's chest. But in the chaos, the dagger sliced down, its tip slick with something dark and oily, cutting a deep gash across Alara's forearm. Pain, sharp and burning, erupted through her arm. The world tilted, the edges of her vision going gray. The last thing she saw was Kalen's face, his feral fury melting away into sheer, absolute terror as he looked at her wound. He had rescued her. But the traitor's plan had not failed completely. The poison was already in her veins, a final deadly blow that threatened to succeed where the mercenaries had failed. Chapter 17. The Politics of the Heart. The bed was soft, the room was warm, but the castle was a prison once more. Since returning, Alara had been confined to a suite of rooms in the royal medical wing. The healers had cleaned the wound on her arm, their faces grim as they spoke of a rare, slow-acting toxin. The poison was a fire in her blood, leaving her weak, dizzy, and amplifying the constant, aching pull of the bond into a feverish need. Kalen was a constant, brooding shadow. He refused to leave her side, sitting in a chair in the corner of the room for hours, just watching her, his face an unreadable mask of granite. But he wouldn't speak. Not about her escape. Not about the kidnapping. Not about the traitor he was now surely hunting. The silence between them was a chasm filled with unspoken fears, unfulfilled desires, and the terrible, fragile hope that had begun to grow in her heart. Did he rescue her because she was his mate, or because she was his possession? The open loop of his true feelings was a torment. This quiet, however, was a deception. Outside her door, a political storm was gathering. Marcus and the traditionalist faction, led by the pompous Lord Valerius, were using her escape and subsequent kidnapping as a weapon. They didn't see a survivor. they saw a liability. "She is a destabilizing influence," Valerius's voice boomed through the door, easily piercing the wood. Alara strained to listen. "The king abandons his duties to hunt for her. Mercenaries are found on our lands. It is chaos, all because of his distraction." "The ancient laws are clear," another voice chimed in. "Such an influence must be contained, or removed, for the good of the kingdom." They were calling for an emergency council session. They were going to put her fate to a vote.
He was trapped, a king in a gilded cage of his own making. Because he had hidden the bond, he now had no legal or traditional grounds to defend her. His enemies were using the very laws he was sworn to uphold to tear her from him. To declare her his mate now, after all this, would look like the desperate act of a weak king ruled by his passions, not his duty. It would be seen as an insult to Lyra's memory. It could ignite a civil war. He was caught between his crown and his soul. He paced the antechamber, the politicians' angry voices a dull roar. He had to outmaneuver them. He had to find a loophole, a delay tactic, anything to buy him time to expose Marcus. But the traitor had planned this perfectly, using the council's own prejudice and fear as his army. He went to her before the session. She was pale, her eyes huge in her face, but she met his gaze with a terrifyingly fragile hope. He wanted to tell her everything. He wanted to tell her that he was a fool, that the thought of losing her was an agony beyond words, that he would burn his kingdom down for her. But the words wouldn't come. The king, the strategist, took over. "I will handle this," was all he said, his voice strained. He was trying to shield her, to tell her to trust him, but he saw the way her hope flickered and died. He saw in her eyes that she heard something else entirely. She heard a king preparing to sacrifice his pawn.
His words were a death knell. "I will handle this." It wasn't a promise of protection, it was a dismissal. He was going to face them alone, to make a political calculation. And she knew, with a certainty that iced her veins, which side of the equation she would fall on. But she would not hide. She would not wait in her room like a lamb for the slaughter. Because her dignity was the one thing she had left. She rose from her bed, her legs shaking, the poison a dull fire in her arm. She put on a simple gray dress, the uniform of the invisible secretary. But as she walked towards the door, she knew the woman who wore it was not invisible anymore. She was going to that council. She would face her accusers. And she would watch, with her own two eyes, as the king she was fated to love made his final, heartbreaking choice. Chapter 18. The King's Choice. The council chamber was a pit of vipers. As she entered, a hush fell. Every lord, every alpha, every member of the court turned to stare. Their eyes were a physical weight, a barrage of contempt, pity, and cold, political calculation. She ignored them. Her gaze was fixed on the man on the obsidian throne. Calin. His face was carved from stone, his eyes a distant, unreadable gold. He saw her enter, a muscle in his jaw clenched. That was his only reaction. She took her place along the wall in the spot where the secretary was supposed to stand, a ghost returning to her haunting grounds. The irony was a bitter taste in her mouth. Lord Valerius stood, his chest puffed out, his voice ringing with self-righteous authority. He didn't look at her, but every word was aimed like an arrow at her heart. He spoke of tradition, of strength, of the pure bloodlines that were the bedrock of their kingdom. He spoke of the glorious, beloved Luna Lyra, her name a holy word on his lips. And then he spoke of the unfortunate distraction that had plagued their king, a low-born temptation that had led to chaos, instability, and recklessness. "For the good of the kingdom," Valerius concluded, his voice booming. "For the stability of the throne and the honor of our king's legacy, I formally demand the exile of the woman, Alara Vane." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. All eyes turned to the throne, to Calin. This was it. The moment of truth. The air was thick with it, heavy with the weight of a kingdom's future and a single shattered heart. Her own heart was a stone in her chest. She didn't dare to hope. Hope was a fool's game, and she had played it one too many times. But still, a small, treacherous part of her waited for him to rise, to roar, to tell them all that she was his.
This was the checkmate. He looked at the sea of hostile faces. Valerius, puffed up with his own importance. Ronan, watching from the corner with a look of cold, predatory assessment. And Marcus. Marcus was looking at him with a placid, knowing smile. The traitor. He held all the cards. Kaelin saw the political trap laid bare. To defend her now, with no proof of Marcus's treason, would be to confirm their every accusation. He would be the weak king, the foolish king, the king ruled by a half-blood nobody. It would tear the council apart. It would spark a civil war. Then he looked at her. She stood by the wall, so small and so terribly alone, yet her back was straight, her head held high. He saw the flicker of hope she was trying so desperately to hide. He saw the devastating pain she was preparing herself for. His wolf clawed at the inside of his ribs, howling. Choose her. Burn them all. She is all that matters. But the king who had failed once before, who had lost his first mate because of a vulnerability, he made a choice. He thought he was being clever. He thought he could outmaneuver them, placate them now with words, and then expose Marcus later. A strategic retreat, a king's sacrifice. He didn't realize it was the move of a coward. He stood. The chamber fell silent. His voice was cold, regal, dead. He looked not at Alara, but at Valerius. The stability of this kingdom is paramount. Each word was a nail in his own coffin. The ancient laws will be respected. The words were not a sentence, they were an execution. He had not just failed to choose her, he had actively chosen them. He had chosen politics. He had chosen tradition. He had chosen the ghost of Luna Lyra. In front of the entire world, he had confirmed her deepest, darkest, most soul-crushing fear. She was his shame. The silver thread of the bond inside her didn't just ache. It snapped. The sound of her own heart breaking was a deafening roar in the sudden silence. She didn't gasp. She didn't cry out. She didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her fall apart. There was a strange, cold calm settling in her veins. The pain was so immense, it was almost peaceful. It was the quiet of a battlefield after the last soldier has fallen. She met his eyes across the room just for a second, and she let him see it all. The shattered hope, the bottomless well of her pain, the final quiet death of her love for him. Then she turned. The first silent tear finally escaped, tracing a cold path down her cheek. And she walked out of the council chamber, her steps steady, leaving her king, her mate, and her broken heart behind. The all-is-lost moment was not a bang. It was a devastating silent whisper that marked the end of everything.
Chapter 19. The Lost Wolf's Scroll. The world had gone gray, numb. After she had walked out of that council chamber, a part of her had simply shut down. The poison from the dagger was a dull throb in her arm, but it was nothing compared to the dead, cold weight where the bond used to be. It wasn't severed, not completely, it was more like a shattered mirror, the connection still there but broken into 1,000 painful, sharp-edged pieces. She was in her rooms, mechanically folding her simple dresses, placing them in a small travel bag. She was preparing for the exile she knew was coming. It was what one did. One followed the procedures. Her goal was to simply exist until the final blow fell. In the aftermath of her public humiliation, there was a strange, hollow peace. There was no more hope to be crushed, no more love to be betrayed. There was only the quiet, efficient packing of a life that was already over. What a fool she'd been. To think that a king could ever choose a nobody. To think a fated bond was stronger than a 5-year-old ghost. A soft, hesitant knock came at her door. She expected a guard, come to deliver the official notice of her banishment. Instead, when she opened it, she saw Finn, the young Omega she had saved. He was twisting a dusty scroll in his hands, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a fierce, protective loyalty. "My lady," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry to disturb you, but I saw you in the archives that day, before everything." He took a deep breath. "You were looking for something. After the council, I knew it wasn't right. What they said, what he did." He pushed the scroll into her hands. "I went back. I don't know why. I just felt I had to. I found this tucked behind a loose stone in the wall where you were standing. I thought maybe it could help." Her fingers closed around the brittle parchment. It felt ancient, humming with a faint, dormant energy. She unrolled it carefully. The script was an older dialect, but after her long hours of research, she could read it. The words seemed to lift off the page, illuminated by a meaning that struck her like a physical blow. It was the full, unredacted text, the prophecy. When the king's soul grows feral from a love lost to shadow, the lost wolf who scents his heart will heal the curse of his reign. It all clicked into place. The feral soul, his uncontrollable rage. The curse wasn't just his grief, it was a tangible thing, a shadow poisoning his reign. And her, the lost wolf, the last of a forgotten line, she wasn't a distraction. She wasn't a liability. She was the cure. Her entire purpose was not just to be his mate. It was to save him. The knowledge didn't heal her broken heart, but it did something else. It filled the hollow, empty places with a spark of fierce, burning purpose. This was bigger than her pain. This was about destiny.
Regret was a physical poison. It was in the air he breathed, the wine he drank. He had sat on his throne after she left, the triumphant pronouncements of his council turning to ash in his ears. He had won the political battle and lost the entire world. He had replayed the moment 1,000 times in his head, the look in her eyes as her heart broke before him. It was a wound that would never heal. He was in his private archives now, tearing through ancient legal scrolls like a madman. He was hunting for a loophole, a precedent, any archaic law he could use to overturn the council's decision and bring her back. He had to fix it. He had to. Because living in a world where he was the cause of that look in her eyes was not living at all. His fingers brushed against a false bottom in an old chest. Curious, he pried it open. It wasn't scrolls. It was a hidden ledger. His grandfather's royal accounts, and tucked within it a newer, more modern ledger. It detailed large, untraceable payments from the royal treasury. Secret payments. He scanned the dates. One payment, for an astronomical sum to an untraceable foreign account, was dated 2 days before Luna Lyra's assassination. The authorization signature at the bottom of the page was clean, precise, and chillingly familiar. Beta Marcus. The 2 open loops, her mysterious past and his, had just provided the weapons they both needed for the war to come. Chapter 20. An alliance of the broken. The ledger felt like a block of ice in his hands. Treason, betrayal, murder. Marcus hadn't just been a political rival. He was the serpent who had been coiled at the heart of his kingdom all along, slowly poisoning everything. He had killed Lyra. He had orchestrated Kaelin's 5 years of grief-stricken paralysis, and he had tried to eliminate Alara. Because Alara, he now understood, was not a weakness. She was the one thing that could heal him, and Marcus couldn't allow that. He went to her. Armed with this damning proof, he stormed through the castle to the rooms where she was being held pending her exile. He expected to find her broken, weeping. He expected to have to fall to his knees and beg for a forgiveness he did not deserve. That was his goal. He found her standing by the window, bathed in moonlight. She was not crying. She was staring at an ancient scroll in her hands, and the look on her face was not one of despair. It was a look of cold, clear, terrifying purpose. The power dynamic between them had irrevocably shifted. "Ilara." His voice was a ragged, broken thing. "I was a fool." She turned to look at him, and her eyes were not filled with tears. They were filled with a fire he had never seen before. "Yes," she said, her voice devoid of its usual warmth. "You were." "I made a political choice," he pressed on, taking a step toward her. "A coward's choice. I thought I was protecting you." "You were protecting yourself," she countered, her voice cutting through his excuses. "From your own fear. From this." She held up the scroll. "This isn't just about us, Kaylin. It's about a curse. A curse of the feral soul that has been poisoning your reign since the day Lyra died, and you have been drowning in it." He stared at her, then at the scroll. "The lost wolf will heal the curse." It was her. It had always been her. The puzzle pieces of his own personal hell were finally slamming into place. "And you have been manipulated," he said, his voice low. He stepped forward and placed the ledger on the table between them. "This is about treason." He explained what he had found. The payments, the timing, Marcus's signature. "He didn't just turn the council against you. I think he's the one who killed Lyra."
The words hung in the air, heavy and monstrous. Marcus, the polite, concerned beta, the loyal friend, the man who had used Lyra's memory like a sacred shield, was the one who had put her in the ground. It was a twist so vile, so diabolical, it made her stomach churn. The open loops of their separate mysteries, her heritage and his wife's murder, had just converged into a single, horrifying tapestry of lies. They were no longer just fighting for their bond. They were fighting to unmask a killer and save the kingdom from the man who had been secretly pulling its strings for years. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice steady despite the chaos raging inside her. "I want an alliance," Kaylin said, his golden eyes pleading with her. "Help me. Help me expose him at the final council session, the one meant to finalize your exile. We can use their own stage to set our trap." She looked at him. The broken king, the foolish mate, the man who had publicly shattered her heart. She saw the desperation in his eyes, the raw, aching regret. He was offering her a chance at justice, a chance to fulfill the destiny written on this ancient scroll. But forgiveness? That was a country she wasn't sure she could ever visit again. "I will help you," she said, her voice clear and cold. "We will do this for the kingdom. We will do this for Lyra's memory." She took a step back as he reached for her hand. "But do not mistake this for forgiveness." The hook was the unresolved chasm between them. They were allies in a war for the kingdom, but the war for her heart was a battle he had already, devastatingly, lost.
Chapter 21. The Eve of the Reckoning. The castle was a coiled snake, waiting to strike. The day of the final council session arrived, and the air was thick with a tense, expectant silence. The court buzzed with anticipation for the final act of their little drama, the formal decree of Alara's exile. They expected a quiet, pathetic ending. They were about to get a reckoning. In accordance with their fragile alliance, they had spent the night planning, moving their pieces into place on the treacherous political chessboard. Ilara was no longer a ghost. She was a spy master. She summoned Finn, the young Omega, whose loyalty to her was now absolute. She gave him quiet, precise instructions. "Go to Lord Tyrell," she whispered, handing him a sealed note. "Remind him of the shipping tariffs Marcus vetoed last season, the ones that cost his house a fortune. Then go to Lady Anya. Ask her why the king's own beta would station his personal guard on the southern border, so far from the Bloodfang threat in the north." She was not spreading rumors. She was planting seeds of truth, using the intricate knowledge of the court she had gathered during her years of invisibility. She was turning her greatest weakness into her greatest weapon. Simultaneously, Kaylin was doing the unthinkable. He was meeting with his greatest rival. He found Ronan in the armory, sharpening a wicked-looking blade. The air between the two alphas was a physical force, a clash of dominance and bitter history. "I'm not here to fight you, Ronan," Kaylin said, his voice a low growl. A pity, Ronan replied without looking up. I hear you'll soon be in need of a new distraction. Kalen ignored the jibe. He tossed a small, heavy purse onto a nearby table. It clinked with the distinct sound of mercenary coin. This was the advance payment given to the men who took Alara. Their commander was talkative before he died. He let that sink in. They were told their final payment would come from your coffers, after I had declared war on you for the insult. Ronan finally stopped sharpening his blade. He looked up, his green eyes narrowed, the easy charm gone, replaced by a cold, calculating intelligence. He saw the trap. Marcus, Ronan said. It wasn't a question. He played you just as he played me. Kalen confirmed. He wants chaos. He wants a broken kingdom. He plans to make his final move at the council today. Stand with me and see justice done for a man who tried to make us kill each other. Or stand aside and let a traitor burn our world to the ground. He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and left the choice hanging in the air. He had to trust that Ronan's ambition was second to his hatred of being played for a fool.
She was a player now, not a pawn. Every whispered message Finn delivered, every seed of doubt she planted, was a move in a deadly game. But the fear was a cold knot in her stomach. If Marcus caught wind of their plan, if he suspected for a second that they knew, he would strike first. And he would not miss. She was walking toward the great hall, her steps steady, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Kalen met her in the corridor, just before the entrance. The guards were gone. It was just the two of them, the air thick with everything they hadn't said. The fate of the kingdom rested on this next hour. Are you ready? He asked, his voice low, intense. I am, she replied, her voice surprisingly firm. He looked at her then, and the mask of the king fell away. She saw only the man, his golden eyes filled with a desperate, soul-deep regret. Alara, he started, his voice thick with emotion. Whatever happens in there, whatever they say, He couldn't finish. He didn't have to. The great carved oak doors to the council chamber swung open, pulled by the guards from within. The sound echoed like a death knell, or a call to arms. It was time. He offered her his arm, a formal, kingly gesture. After a heartbeat's hesitation, she took it. Not as a lover, but as an ally. They walked in together, a united, unbroken front. The entire council, a sea of hostile and confused faces, turned to stare, and in the center of them all, standing beside the throne, was Beta Marcus, a confident, triumphant smile on his face, the smile of a man who thought he had already won. The final confrontation was about to begin. Chapter 22. The Kneeling King. The air in the council chamber was a held breath. 1,000 heartbeats waiting for the axe to fall. They had walked in together, a united front, but Alara felt the fragile nature of their alliance. One wrong move, one misstep, and the whole desperate plan would crumble. Marcus stood beside the throne, his face a mask of smug victory. He thought he was the puppet master. He had no idea his strings were about to be cut. He raised a hand for silence. My lords, he began, his voice dripping with false solemnity. We are gathered to finalize a difficult but necessary decision. To protect the stability of our kingdom and the sanctity of the royal line, it is time to vote on the exile of No. The word was not a roar. It was a low, cold, deadly sound that cut through Marcus's speech like a shard of obsidian. Kalen stepped down from the dais, not toward his throne, but into the center of the floor. He held the old leather-bound ledger in his hand. The room watched, utterly silent. We will not be voting on exile today, Kalen said, his golden eyes scanning the faces of his council. Instead, we will be discussing treason and murder. A collective gasp rippled through the hall. Marcus's confident smile faltered. Kalen opened the ledger. I have here financial records detailing large, secret payments from the royal treasury. He began to read, dates, amounts, foreign accounts. Every word was a hammer blow, chipping away at Marcus's composure. "And this payment," Kalen said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper, "for a sum large enough to buy a small army of assassins, was authorized 2 days before my mate, Luna Lyra, was killed." He held up the ledger, showing the final page. "By the man who claimed to be my most loyal friend. By the man who has used her memory as a shield for his own ambition. The signature belongs to Beta Marcus." Chaos erupted. Shouts, accusations. The council was a storm of confusion and outrage. Marcus's face had gone ashen. "Lies!" he screamed, his mask of civility finally cracking. "He is a weak king, bewitched. He would say anything to protect his half-blood whore." He lunged, not for Kalen, but for the ceremonial sword hanging on the wall. A desperate final move. But before he could reach it, a figure blocked his path. Ronan. The rival Alpha stood, his arms crossed, a cold, predatory smile on his face. "I think not, Marcus. The king and I may have our differences, but we both despise being played for a fool." One by one other lords stood, Lord Tyrell, Lady Anya. The seeds they had planted had taken root. Marcus was alone, cornered, defeated.
It was done. The political war was won. The traitor was exposed. But as the guard seized a screaming, spitting Marcus, Kalen felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction. Because the most important battle was yet to be fought. He turned from the chaos. He ignored the stunned faces of his council. He looked at only one person. Ilara. She stood by the wall, her face pale, her eyes wide, watching him. This was it. The moment that mattered more than any law, any tradition, any kingdom. He walked toward her, every step a confession. The lords and ladies parted before him, their whispers dying in their throats. He stopped in front of her. The Alpha King, the ruthless ruler, the broken man, and in front of all of them, he knelt. A gasp, sharp and unified, swept through the chamber. An Alpha King knelt for no one, ever. He took her hand, his head bowed. His voice, when he spoke, was not for them. It was for her alone, yet it carried with the weight of his entire soul. "I denied you out of fear," he said, his voice ragged with a pain that was 5 years deep. "I broke your heart because mine was already broken. I called you a mistake, but I was the one who was wrong." He looked up, and his golden eyes were shining with unshed tears. The raw vulnerability was an act of surrender more powerful than any coronation. "You are not a replacement for what I lost," he confessed. "You are the reason I can be whole again, the reason the curse can finally be broken." He squeezed her hand. "I am nothing without you, Ilara Vane." He paused, his voice dropping to a reverent whisper. "My queen, my mate." He rose slowly. He didn't wait for an answer. He leaned in front of the entire world, he sank his fangs into the soft, waiting skin of her neck. Pain. Pleasure. A blinding golden light erupted from the point of contact, a visible manifestation of the bond snapping into place. It flooded the room, a wave of pure, primal power. Ilara gasped, her hands flying to his shoulders, her body arching into his. He pulled back, his eyes blazing, a triumphant, possessive love shining from their depths. Then he threw his head back and howled, a long, powerful, joyous sound that echoed through the castle, across the lands, a declaration to the entire world. The king was no longer broken. The prophecy was fulfilled. The lost wolf had been found.
Chapter 23. The Dawn of a Queen. The world came back into focus slowly. The first thing she felt was the bond. It was no longer a frayed, aching thread. It was a river of warm, golden light flowing between them, a deep, resonant hum in her very soul. It sang with his emotions, his overwhelming love, his profound relief, his fierce, unwavering possessiveness, and it sang with her own strength, peace, a feeling of completeness she had never known was possible. She felt home. She raised a trembling hand to her neck. The skin was tender, and she could feel the faint, swirling pattern of the mark, a permanent symbol of his claim, of their connection. Following the tumultuous climax, the council chamber was utterly silent, the lords and ladies staring in stunned, reverent awe. The golden afterglow of the marking still seemed to linger in the air. Kaelin turned from her, his eyes, still blazing with the power of the newly forged bond, landing on Marcus. The traitor was being held by two massive guards, his face a mask of disbelief and hatred. "You will not be executed, Marcus," Kaelin said, his voice a low, terrifying calm. "Death is too merciful a fate for you." He raised his voice for the entire council to hear. "You are stripped of your name, your rank, and your titles. You are hereby banished to the cursed lands of the north. You will live out your days as a rogue, without the comfort of a pack, without the warmth of a wolf." He made a sharp gesture. "Take him away." A fate worse than death. A collective shiver went through the room. As Marcus was dragged away, still screaming threats and curses, Lord Valerius and the other traditionalists who had supported him sank to one knee, their heads bowed in submission. The rebellion was over. Ronan was the last to approach. He walked up to them, his green eyes assessing, and for the first time Alara saw a flicker of genuine respect in them. He gave a short, sharp nod. "You have your queen, Kaelin. Try not to lose this one." With that, he turned and left, the rivalry between them settled, if not entirely erased. In the wake of this resolution, the court began to clear out, the lords and ladies offering low, respectful bows to her, to their new queen, as they left. The awe in their eyes was a strange, disorienting thing. She, Alara Vane, the half-blood nobody, was their queen. She stood beside Kaelin, not behind him, her hand still in his. They were a united front. When they were finally alone, the vast hall echoing with silence, the adrenaline faded, leaving a deep, bone-weary exhaustion in its place. He turned to her, his fierce, kingly mask melting away, leaving only the man, his eyes full of a tender, anxious reverence. He gently reached out and traced the edge of the mark on her neck, his touch sending a shiver of pleasure through her. "Does it hurt?" he asked, his voice a soft murmur. She shook her head, leaning into his touch. "No," she whispered. "It feels like coming home." The raw, unguarded love in his eyes was almost too much to bear. He had knelt for her. He had claimed her. He had chosen her. He had done everything right. But the memory of his betrayal, the cold, dead words in this very chamber, was a ghost that still stood between them, a wound that a fated bond alone could not heal. He must have seen the shadow in her eyes. The hope on his face faltered, replaced by a familiar, aching pain. "Alara," he started, his voice thick with unshed emotion. "Can you ever forgive me?" His question was a bridge, stretching across the chasm he had created between them, and her quiet, uncertain silence was the answer. The kingdom was saved, the traitor was banished. But their own personal story, it was still broken. The final piece of their resolution was still just out of reach. Chapter 24. A Kingdom of Light. 3 months later, the castle felt like a different world. The oppressive grief that had clung to the stones for 5 long years had finally lifted, chased away by the bright, warm sunlight that now streamed through the windows. The ghost was gone. In its place was a quiet, bustling energy of a kingdom healing, of a pack finding its strength again. Because the curse had been broken, the entire realm felt lighter. She stood before the council, not as a defendant, but as their queen. Kaelin stood beside her, not on a throne above her, his presence a warm, steady source of strength at her back. She looked at the faces of the lords, Valerius, humbled, Tyrell and Anya, steadfast allies. Even Ronan, attending as a foreign delegate, watched with a grudging respect. "My lords, my ladies," she began, her voice clear and strong, resonating with a quiet authority she had never known she possessed. "For too long, the strength of our packs has been defined only by our alphas. We have ignored the contributions of our betas, and we have neglected the welfare of our Omegas. She told them the story of Finn, of the casual cruelty of Captain Vorlag. A simple story, but one that resonated with the truth of their world. Today, I propose a new law, the Omega's Charter, a Bill of Rights guaranteeing their protection, their education, and their place of honor within our society. A pack is only as strong as its most vulnerable member. It is time we became stronger. She finished, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, Lord Tyrell stood. I second the Queen's proposal. One by one, others stood in agreement. She had done it. She was using her power not just to rule, but to heal.
He watched her, and his heart felt full. So full he thought it might burst. This was his Ilara, not the timid mouse who hid in the shadows, but the brilliant, compassionate, fiercely intelligent leader who had been there all along. She was not just his mate, his heart, the anchor for his soul. She was his partner, his equal. She was a far better ruler than he had ever been, because she ruled with a wisdom and compassion he had lost in his grief. His transformation was complete. The broken king was gone, and in his place was a man made whole, made stronger, by the love he had been so terrified to accept. Later that night, they were in their chambers. Not his old Spartan rooms, but a new suite they had chosen together, filled with books and light and warmth. The tension that had defined their relationship for so long was gone, replaced by a deep, easy intimacy that was more precious to him than any crown. He had spent the last 3 months earning back her trust, not with grand declarations, but with quiet, consistent devotion. He listened to her ideas. He supported her decrees. He showed her, every single day, that he valued her mind as much as he adored her soul. He came up behind her as she stood on the balcony, looking out at the moonlit gardens. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her back against his chest. He nuzzled the silvery, swirling mark on her neck, the scent of her, his mate, a constant calming joy. You were magnificent today, he murmured into her hair. We were, she corrected softly, leaning her head back against his shoulder. We are a team. He smiled, savoring the word. We. I was a fool, he said, the confession easy now, the old pain finally losing its sting. She turned in his arms to face him, her eyes soft and shining in the moonlight. She reached up and cupped his cheek, her touch gentle. You were afraid, she said, her voice full of a grace he knew he didn't deserve. And you were alone. You are not alone anymore. It was the forgiveness he had been craving, offered so freely, so completely. He leaned down and kissed her, a slow, tender kiss filled with all the words he could never quite say. A kiss of gratitude, of devotion, of a love so profound it had reshaped their world. And now? He whispered against her lips, echoing a question from a lifetime ago. She smiled, a brilliant, beautiful thing that lit up her entire face. She looked out at the peaceful kingdom below, then back at him, her eyes full of their shared future. The bond between them was a steady, powerful, and unbreakable song. Now, she said, her voice full of a deep and lasting peace, we are home.